believe that there's a spiritual dimension to life, which is actually underlying all of these things. And when I get clarity on the spiritual dimension of life and understand, like, why am I here? What am I doing? What is all of this? What are human beings? Those kinds of questions, right? That's when talking to a woman becomes very easy. Ege Reynolds, welcome to Manifesto's YouTube channel. Good to have you on board for a conversation.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
Great. So you've kind of, I don't know if you've stepped into the fire or something like that, but I've decided to at least title this conversation Christianity versus dating coaching. And let's see how it goes. I mean, we've just agreed that we're going to have a real conversation of saying what we think and then really listening to each other and trying to understand where we're coming from as well. But I think I'll start it off because it's me. You wrote to me and asked if you could come on for a conversation, and I looked a bit at you and I've kind of grilled you a little bit over email. And I found that you're a very reflective guy, and you definitely. I've listened to some of the interviews that you've had, and there's a lot of really great things that you're talking about. And then there's an aspect of what you're doing which I'm concerned about. And I think part of it is, and so if I'm going to come from this perspective that, I've mentioned to you that in my own life, I've had a period of like extreme promiscuity and playing around and doing a lot of stuff, which I've then come to realize was actually quite destructive for myself. And so I've then came back to the faith of my childhood, which is Christianity, and converted to become an Orthodox Christian, and just found that there's some truths which are very, very old, and which when I've just submitted myself to some of these very old ideas, that everything in my life has fitted into place. And so when I look around me today and I look back on my own past, then what I see is a lot of men who are desperate to get laid or to find connection with women. I think we probably never had a period with so much loneliness and disconnection between men and women that we have today. And there's a kind of a rejection of ancient wisdom. And so what I see is there's a lot of young guys who have quite little experience with actually creating a long-term, deep relationship with a woman, but themselves are still busy dating, or maybe just have a short-term relationship here or there, and are living a bit of this playboy life. But they are able to elevate themselves into a kind of a little bit of an idol status through some good marketing and all kinds of other stuff, and put themselves out there as some kind of dating guru. And they get a lot of customers, a lot of men looking for advice. And the core thing that's on people's mind is often, how do I get a woman somehow? How do I connect with a woman? And what I think is really missing a lot of the time is a long-term perspective in the view of an entire lifetime of a man. Because what I realized is when I was out doing the exact same thing, is that I didn't realize what it took to create a lifelong partnership with a woman that I could create a family with, create a life with, that could support me in my purpose as a man. And there's some elements there which are really important. And if I go out onto the dating market without having those in mind, I'm going to probably be cutting corners and compromising. And I think for a lot of guys, there's just one element that really pops up. It's just like, a hot woman, or something like a woman who arouses some kind of like passionate emotional response in me, where I feel like I'm in love. And in my experience, like these feelings, it could be like a lot of energy or all that sort of like, wow. But a lot of it, it's often connected actually to either trauma or dysfunction that I'm actually subconsciously trying to fix some, traumatic experience with my parents or something like that, and end up finding a partner where, we have this crazy intense meeting and a lot of sex in the beginning, and then things go into chaos afterwards and break up, and breaks people's hearts, and they then become jaded and hurt and living life like that. So I mean, that's the thing I'm against. Maybe I'll get back to then my positive case, but I'll give you a chance to respond to that first of all.
Yeah, I think what you said about people getting hurt along the journey and losing a sense of groundedness is definitely a real problem. And it is true, when you sleep around a lot, there is a lot of hurt. And when I was going through a period of my life, first of all, when I started the journey of meeting people, like I grew up in Turkey, which we were talking about a bit before the recording, and I had two little sisters, so I was the oldest one. And I think coming from that background, I was never drawn too much to the dark side of the seduction community, which is where you completely manipulate people. Because I grew up with two little sisters and I was very protective of them. So the idea of like lying, manipulating women was never something I felt okay with. And my parents were very big on like a sense of integrity. I remember growing up and one day my parents went to dinner and I was alone at home and I was playing soccer in my living room, right? So I kick the ball and just break this TV holder, like the window just broke. And of course, I was like 4 or 5 years old. I don't really understand how reality works. My parents come back and my mom goes, "What happened?" And I thought, "Oh, I didn't do that. That wasn't me." But I was the only one in the house, right?
Mhm.
And I remember in that moment, my mom was like, "Look, whatever you do, tell me the truth because I'm not going to be upset about what you did. I'm going to be upset if you don't tell me the truth."
Mhm.
So growing up with that background, that was very important to me. But I was also someone who was socially anxious, who couldn't talk to people. Like I could go do math or go do physics or read like a book a week. But when it came to speaking to a woman I was interested in, I was just frozen. So I think the perspective of me meeting women was a lot more about my own journey of stepping into confidence versus like, I want this outcome. And I do agree that if a guy gets in this journey just from a point of like, I want to be with all these girls, I want to be with the hottest girl, I want to go from this quality of girl to this quality of girl, that's only going to create more suffering for him, even if he gets those women. And a lot of men and a lot of women get hurt along that journey because it's not like you're actually dating someone else. It's like you're using someone as an object to prove something to yourself, like, oh, yeah, I can get this type of woman. And I think that's where casually dating without owning emotions and, as you said, having that long term vision is very painful. Now, at the same time, I do think some guys have to go through that journey to see it for themselves and go, yeah, that was not a good period of my life. And that experience gives you perspective. So I think in that sense, it's a balance of like listening to conversations like this and understanding what you're getting into if you do want to go in that direction, but also realizing like, at least for some people, I think there's no way of just bypassing your desires and being like, I'm never going to do that. And I think the position of learning how to date, when you have that, and then you get into a relationship, you know, you picked your woman and you don't have the doubt of like, oh, but what if I could be with this woman? What if I could be with this woman? And I think guys who get into relationships from not having had those experiences and built that confidence, they may be in a relationship, but their experience of intimacy is stuck at a surface level because they still energetically keep looking around and they're not like fully committed.
Mhm. I really appreciate the story from your childhood, Ege. I think that's one of the really important things, and so that shows me a lot of maturity that you just brought that up there as well, because we're so formed in through these what our family is and the way that we relate to each other, and that sounds like that was an important little moment in your life, and I could imagine. It makes me recall moments where maybe I've been less than honest with my own mother, and then how that's been then played into the way that I've been had to act, or that I've been with other women later on in my life. We were talking a little bit about desire before we started this conversation, and then you touched on it again this time here, and you said something like maybe men have to live out their desires before they can move on and do something like that, and that's something that I think is a very commonly propagated idea and belief. Even I hear men regularly saying, I know this is bad for me, but I need to do it anyway because I have to get it out of my system or something like that.
Right.
And very often this is connected to hookups or different sexual experiences or exploring different relationships with women, which men know is not a long-term successful thing. And
Right.
For me, this is actually what I call something like, I don't know, you could call it what you want, but definitely it's a dysfunctional twisting of desire and it's a slavery to the worst parts of yourself in some way if you start believing in this idea. And so I think for me, as a person, I work professionally with men who are often looking for making important life decisions. I'm sure a lot of guys come to you and your clients and are making life decisions as well, and you become like a trusted advisor for them. I think that this idea that you have to live out your desires, the thing is that people are identifying what they believe to be a desire, but what is actually leading to confusion and chaos in their life. And so the desire isn't their own, but it's been planted there by a society that is basically just trying to make us addicted to screens and to pornography and to whatever it is that we're, like hooked into. And some of the most intelligent people in the world today are working full-time at these social media companies to just hook us, and they're very, very well paid, of course, right? And they're designing these algorithms to just capture our attention, and they do it by exploiting weaknesses in our psychology. And a lot of it for men is about their sexuality and their sexual desires. And so we become obsessed with these things, and we become these zombies in reality. I'm talking about myself. That's how I live my life. And I bought into this thing like, oh yeah, this is probably just going to be really chaotic and dangerous, but like I have to do it anyway. And it's going to be fun. And yeah, I might have had some fun, but my life became this roller coaster ride that increasingly was heading over the edge of a cliff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like almost a level of hedonistic adjustment. And the more you push the boundary, the more you have to keep pushing the boundary to get similar levels of satisfaction or excitement, right? Even casually dating, and I've been there as well, a lot of what people call love is just lust. You're just living out emotions with someone, and they're
or just fascination and objectification, fetishization of something that you don't really understand and not even interested in the details of it. You don't actually mean this as a human being. You just see it as an object for the fulfillment of your fantasy or your desire or whatever it is, right? And so it becomes a mutual exploitation, and it just ends in hurt, right? So, okay, great. I've been ranting about this now for some time. How you have a girlfriend? How did you step out of the cycle? Like, how did you decide, like, okay, you've obviously had a lot of fun going out dating, and you've had a lot of intense meetings. What was it that made you realize that, like, I don't want to just be a playboy and be playing around like this all the time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, like, there's a lot of nuance to the dating process, right? For me, yes, I met women casually. I've dated women casually. I wasn't usually the guy who was like, I'm going to have this one experience and never talk to this girl again. So even within those experiences, I was traveling a lot the past few years before I settled down here. And I meet someone and we date for like a few weeks, right? And within that, of course, you're not going to know each other as much as you would know each other if you're married or if you're in a relationship for a few years. But there's still a layer of emotional depth. And I think at the beginning of the journey, it wasn't even about dating for me. It was like, I want to speak to people, and the voice in my mind is saying, you don't deserve that. You can't do that. There's no way this girl is going to pay attention to anything you have to say. And, back to childhood, I grew up overweight. And in high school, I was like 102 kilograms, which was quite a lot in Turkey. So I lost weight before coming to college, but it's like my mind didn't catch up that I was no longer fat. So when I tried to interact with people, in my mind, I was still the fat kid who was not desired, who was not attractive, who couldn't get the level of interest he wanted from women. So that when it came to meeting women and approaching people in general, I was like, I want to know that I'm not missing out on connections because I'm not doing anything. I want to know that if I see someone and I'm interested in them, I could go speak to them. And I think that's very different compared to a guy going like, oh, I want to sleep with as many girls as I can. And that's where being able to socialize with people or start conversations can still be valuable if you're looking for something long term. Now, that being said, of course, when you do start seeing success, whatever success means, or when you do start having more experiences with women, there's a side to it that's almost like an addiction. And that's why I think a lot of guys get stuck, or people in general are now stuck sleeping around, because it's almost like drinking, or it's almost like taking heavy drugs. You get used to it. And then, as you were talking about it, and I've had that experience as well, it's like to have the same level of almost like a hit, the dopamine hit, you need to keep pushing the experience further and further intensely, maybe like more people involved, crazy in this place, do all this stuff, right? And that caused a lot of suffering. So, coming back to your question, I had pushed the boundary over time and I dated a lot of people, and I realized up to a certain point, okay, I want more depth. And once I realized that, I started dating very slowly. So I would still go on dates, but I would actively try not to push things very further. I would actively try and look at, like, is this girl compatible with me long term? And then being in Austin, like moving somewhere permanently, this was the first time I lived somewhere for more than a few months in a few years. So I knew, okay, the situation's right, because if I tried to commit when I was traveling, it wasn't the situation for it unless that person could also travel with me. So I think it was a mix of the situation as well as my own readiness for it. And the moment I realized, like, okay, this is a path I should pursue, was first of all, my girlfriend was someone who inspired me a lot with her levels of compassion and kindness and care and just level of integrity she had. So because of my experience dating around, I knew how to filter a woman really well and make sure that I was the one getting into a relationship that I cared about. And the second part of it, and I think you'll like this part, is I realized, to me, approaching a table of 7 women was actually easier than going up to this girl I was dating and saying, hey, you know, when that happened, I felt a bit jealous. Like, I would rather go approach people in crazy social situations than be vulnerable. And I was like, you know what? I like this girl. And for my own path of growth, this is where I need to go right now. Because at the beginning, for me, following the fear was, can you see a woman in the coffee shop that you like and go speak to her and be as open as you can with your intentions without getting stuck in the nice guy tendencies of like acting like friends or hiding my intention? That was following the fear at the beginning. And I did that for a few years. And I realized early this year, now following the fear was, okay, really lean into this intimacy and build something meaningful with someone, and actually actively remove all your other options. Because when you know how to date around as well, always having other options can be like, okay, do I really want to let go of this? And there can be a fear around that. Mm-hmm. And when I realized, if I want to experience intimacy deeply, this is the path, that's how I got to the decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I can't help but think that the fact that you grew up in it sounds like your mother and father lived together in a loving marriage, and you had a family home, which was where people were kind and thoughtful to each other and had focus on like having good values, was maybe what helped you get out of that. You know, I'm reminded when you spoke about this as an addiction, I'm thinking of this experiment where you put some rats in like terrible bear cages and you give them access to cocaine, then they just like use the cocaine all the time. But if you put them in like rat heaven, then they're actually not at all interested in the cocaine, because their body actually rejects it because they have all their needs. They're living in more an abundant place or something like that. So that sounds the fact that you have a good foundation, I think, sounds relevant. I just want to put an alternative model toward you like regarding this dating model. So it's like the idea is like, okay, you're a single person, you need to find a partner. What you do is you go out and you start dating, and then that's how you meet a whole lot of different people. You have different experiences. You figure out who is the right one for you, and then you make a relationship with that person. That's like, do we agree? Like that's a kind of basic dating model. I have a guy who I spoke to about recently called it like the marketplace or something like that.
Very technical term.
Yeah, technical term. Good for logical guys, I guess. That can use economic game theory to analyze it.
I think I mean, that's a good overall approach. I do think there's a level of magic and romance where if you solidify something to a model that you kind of miss. So one of the pointers I give to my clients is like, keep your heart open. Because sometimes you may be approaching all these girls, doing all this strategy, but the woman you may meet who may be a good partner can just appear randomly. Like I met my girlfriend in salsa class just randomly, and we just got along. So I think it's good to have that strategy as a basis, like meet some people, date around, pick the partner you want to be with.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if you do that with your heart closed, you don't actually see all the options around you truly. And then it's like going back to what you said about desire. If desire comes from craving instead of a genuine pull and inspiration, like sometimes you end up dating women who are not really good for you just because she's hot, versus like they're women who just draw you in with inspiration. You spend time around them and you're like, wow, I want to spend more time with that person. And that's why I like that as a general model. But I think the addition is like, keep your heart open and actually pay attention to how you feel around these women you're dating, apart from just how she looks and a few other like surface level qualities.
Okay. I really like what you said about how you met your current girlfriend. And so that leads me to the model that I wanted to put forward. So for me, an alternative to this idea of you need to go out and date, that is that as a man, you figure out what's important to me. What are my talents? What am I good at? What can I contribute to people? How can I earn money? Where do I create value for others? And you find a community or a group that's centered around the same values or the same goals that you think you can orientate your life purpose towards. You find a community like that, whatever it is. Preferably, it should be a very positive community, one that's also a long-term valuable community. Right. And you work to support that community and to build up that community. And if you do that, then what's going to happen straight away is that the females in that community, they're going to see like, wow, this guy, he's really creating value here. He's really building up, the principles and the values and whatever it is that makes our community thrive. I want to be a part of that because they've obviously been attracted to the same community. They're also members of it. And so when you're then in that situation, then you don't need to worry about all of these things because then there'll be these women there and they'll just be able to make the choice, basically, which one do you want? And because that's how you'll become the kind of man that a woman will want to be with. And you won't have to go out and impress anybody. You won't have to go out and like inspire, do anything. You'll be able to just take your pick. Because for me, the risk is you're always talking about women in the multiple. And I get it that we have this idea planted in our minds that like as men, like our values almost from the amount of women that are willing to have sex with us. And I lived my life for many years under this idea that my value as a man somehow, it wasn't explicit. It wasn't something I ever said in those words. But if I look at it, then like I really like every time a new woman was willing to go to bed with me, I felt like, oh, I'm okay. And and funny enough, it was a woman who said to me, Paul, this is really just insecurity that you feel like you need to go out and sleep with all this women. And I was really offended by that. Maybe a lot of guys don't have that, but I think a lot of guys who go into these very promiscuous phases of their life are driven by this. And what I see is that it takes out a part of your heart. You don't need to go out and date a whole lot of women. You don't need to go out and sleep with a whole lot of women. What you need is one woman. And all the studies that have ever been done on like longevity in relationships and level of education, level of health, and actually life expectancy all show that the more promiscuous people are, the lower you score on all of those parameters. And people who are less promiscuous, who have fewer life partners, down to one is the optimal. There's actually a jump if you go from one to multiple. Then you live longer, you get a better education, better career, better earnings, and also just much longer, especially expectancy for a relationship to last as well. So this idea that like we need to go out and experiment a whole lot beforehand, it's not true. It's actually not true. All of the research shows it's actually not the case.
Yeah, I think with the research studies, you know, it's good proof for a lot of people. Like it's what's average, right? And I do think there's exceptions to the data that you look at. So there might be someone who's promiscuous, who's learned a lot of lessons from it, and that's allowed him to build a fulfilling partnership. Because if I look at my own journey, let's say we were talking to the versions of ourselves who are 18, could you actually convince that version of you to be with one person? And I think that
I remember when I was probably about 17, 18, saying to myself, I know these things are true, but I'm gonna kind of pray that I'll realize them again when I'm older, because right now I want to go out and play and have fun. That's what
yeah,
that's
no,
what I did.
that's what I did at a certain period as well. And I think like the key is we are able to have this conversation partially because we've had those experiences as well. So we're not just talking about a theoretical thing of sleeping around, and we've actually done it a little bit to go, this is what happened from our personal experience. So I think it comes down to the person who's listening to this conversation. If you know in your heart and you're listening to this conversation, like don't sleep around if you know, okay, this feels really right to me. Like I work with clients. One of my clients was just looking for someone to marry. And he recently found a woman like 2 months ago where he's like, okay, this is the person I want to marry. And I think the approach you said is very, very valid. And what I would add to that approach is just one thing, which is if you have women around you that you feel drawn to, go talk to them. That doesn't mean go on dates with a lot of women. Like when I work with someone, the first few things we do is like, what do you actually want? Let's forget what looks cool to your friends. Let's forget what your family wants out of you. Let's forget like, what is this deep vision of you have for yourself of being the next Dan Bilzerian? You know those are not coming from genuine places, but what do you actually want? And then you, as you said, you get clear on that, right? And then you go to the right environments. And I think part of the right environments, along with communities, is just like you said, doing the things you like and then finding people who are compatible with that. And the only thing I would say there is be able to interact with the woman as well. Because the thing is, there are guys out there who are doing all these things, but their real fear is like when they see a woman they like, they almost freeze up and they don't know how to talk to this woman. And they can be the cool guy around their friends. But when it comes to a woman they're interested in, it's like their mind just goes blank. It's like the books that you have behind you, you have all the information in your head, and an attractive woman appears, and you're like, whoa, well, how do we talk again? And that's the part I'm really big on. It's not sleeping with a lot of women. It's not going on a lot of dates. You can do that if you want. It may not help. It may help. But it's really knowing that, hey, if I'm somewhere and I see a woman I'm drawn to and I want to talk to her, and when I say drawn to, I don't mean like, oh, she's hot, I would love to sleep with her. It's like you see someone and there's something about their energy that you just want to go speak to. Being able to take that opportunity is, I think, a skill single guys should have so that when they get into a relationship, they're like, okay, I'm with this woman because I picked this woman for my life based on my values, what I want, who I want to be moving forward, and who I want to build my future with. So I think in that sense, we're all taking about the same thing, which is we don't want people to settle and instead make that choice consciously.
Yeah.
And
Well,
in the journey of building that,
I want to balance it with something that I heard you saying in another
Yeah.
conversation, which I liked, because a little bit, I get what you're saying. And then I also think that there's a little bit, it can become like this kind of, again, consumerization thing like that. It's like, I'm like going into a shop. What do I want? How am I going to use it? What are my checklist or something like that, right? And what I really liked, I listened to your conversation that you sent me a link to, I think Shauna something or other. This woman.
with Shayna.
The first point you brought up really spoke to me was about the heart. And you've actually mentioned in this conversation as well a couple of times, where about like being in contact with your heart. So I'm actually curious to ask you just to dig into that a little bit more. What do you mean by the heart, and why that? Like what is that about for you?
Yeah, I think the mind thinks and the heart knows.
Mhm.
And that's very different. And I think like we live an aligned life when the mind and the heart is in unity. And that's also how you create an aligned dating life, at least from the way I see it. So when I talk about being in the heart, right? When you're in the heart, so a quick exercise to kind of just do this is like just for a few seconds, closing the eyes and thinking about the thing you love the most. You know, it could be a family member, it could be your kid, it could be your grandparents, it could be a pet you had. And it's like in that space, reality feels safer.
Mhm.
Our being is more expansive. We're more in that moment. And I think a lot of problems men experience with women and lack of ability to go speak to them, but also lack of clarity in terms of what they want. Like as we were talking about, sleeping with women because of that thing, they think like it's gonna make them cool, even when you're on a date and you like this woman's talking and you're like, these are very questionable life decisions she's made. I probably shouldn't be around her, but then the desire convinces you, oh no, 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 this is not important. At least I'll go follow this. And then after that, I can make an ethical decision. It's like when you're in your heart, you actually feel this person's not right for me. And I think that's where there's such a big focus because in the heart, there is no fear. And your decisions are coming from inspiration rather than scarcity of like, what would happen if I don't do this?
Mhm.
And that creates a very peaceful dating life and a peaceful life in general, which is my overall goal for people is not just for them to date around. It's how do we create a peaceful dating life and then eventually find the partner that we want to be with. And
Mhm.
I do agree from your approach, like when I was sleeping around and I was following more casual experiences, I wasn't in the heart as much. Like it's easy to convince yourself, oh yeah, I'm being vulnerable and things like that. But it's like when you're really in the heart, we don't really want a number of women to be with. We want to experience intimacy and we mistake intimacy as like, here are the number of women I've been with. Therefore, intimacy points increase. And I think, as you were saying, you know, there's a lot of societal training around that that's both hurting men, but also hurting women. And I think in the heart, we can step away from that conditioning because only the mind gets caught up in that narrative. And in your heart, you really know your path. So I'd recommend people to just be and exist where they imagine the thing they love the most. You can do that for 10, 15 minutes a day and then get used to that space. And if you're more analytical, then you can pick like an object like this and imagine this is your anchor to be back in the heart. And I think that will really help people be in social situations in a very real way. And part of my work with people is how do you train yourself not to say the attractive thing when you're talking to a girl who's really not for you, and instead in your heart say, this is not right for me. It was nice meeting you. Enjoy the rest of your day. And I think those are also the skills people get to build along this journey when they're led with integrity versus if you're not led with integrity, you'll go, okay, what do I say to make this woman think we're very compatible, which is a very dark path to go on.
Yeah. Yeah. I I get what you're saying. Then I'm actually wondering, like, I was surprised you said like to go into the heart, you close your eyes and then you think about something. For me, in the Christian tradition, there's a very long tradition for like meditating on the heart and putting your attention in the heart, and it's often called like guarding the heart as well, like to stay to guard your heart, and so a lot of it will be like putting your attention in your physical heart area, like allowing your attention to go there. And then what they use there, like I think you're right, having a physical object can be very valuable. A picture can be valuable. Some people stare into a flame or something like that. Like so in the Christian tradition, then you'll use Christ. There's a something called the Jesus prayer, which is a very short one sentence prayer which people repeat. And monks in monasteries, in Orthodox monasteries, actually repeat this prayer in their heart until it starts happening automatically. So for many monks, I don't know if it's the majority or not, but for a lot of monks, then they actually, for the rest of their life, then this prayer is just being repeated in their heart all the time. Jesus prayer. And so that's something that I think is valuable. And then part of what I've done is spend some time in various New Age communities, which practice this idea of polyamory. And there they spoke a lot about the heart as well. But it was like, for me, it was like this cognitive idea of heart. And there was just an awful lot of, delusional playing out of traumas, even though it was, kind of, so I don't know. Sometimes I see, like, in the Christian tradition, there's this very strong, some people, I mean, Christianity is quite extreme. It's actually very extreme. Like, the idea is that you take all of your sexual energy, 100% of it, and you direct it to one person for all of your life. It's like a closed container. It's considered, Christ says something like, if you just look at another woman with lust in your heart, then you've committed adultery with her. That's what he says. So it's like this really radical thing. It's about like thought police and stuff like that. And it's something that, like, I think if without having the Christian faith, it's impossible to do, actually, because we can't actually get a handle on these things. But I think most people can understand the power of that. It's like directing this like incredibly powerful energy inside at the core of your being and put it towards one person, and then trying to then create love with that person as well, because then we have to bring our entire person into that meeting with that other being, right? And with all of our differences and difficulties and misunderstandings of each other and different ways of seeing the world, right?
Yeah, and as you said, that's very powerful, like being in a relationship fully and redirecting all your energy. And I like what you brought up about Jesus's comment around, like, even when you look at a woman with lust, there's adultery there. Because I think there's also, at least from the way I see it as well, something may not be cheating in a societal sense, but energetically, there may be people taking your energy away. And as you were talking about that, I remember, like, when I got into a relationship at first, I also have friends who are much, much deeper into the community of dating around and just like seeing where things go, taking things a lot less casually. And their question was like, but don't you sometimes get drawn to other women? And I was like, you know what? Not really. Because this time I've really made that decision. And because as I spent more time in my heart, I could feel like temptation sometimes. But it's like, as you said, even just not looking at other women and being with my energy as much as with my girlfriend became very important to me, even though there was no societal thing of like, that's wrong. I think there are layers in which like our energy can be depleted in other things, this time in the context of a relationship, but also in our lives. Like, we can deplete our work energy looking at Instagram. Like, I don't follow any girls on my Instagram account that I look at, or I don't visit any websites. And I think, as you said, there are layers to the levels of faithfulness. And when you direct your energy to one thing, I could see how powerful that would be. Of course, I haven't practiced it at the depth that you have, so I can only theoretically make that comment.
Yeah, I haven't been married for very, very many years yet, and I wonder what would have happened if I had been doing this for a very long time. And you're right, Ege. Like, I've had a very interesting life. I've had a very colorful life, and I have some experiences that can help us to have a really interesting conversation, I guess, as well. And then, so yeah, I think it doesn't matter. But what you were saying really reminded me of bringing it back to desire, because I believe, like, when I look at what I'm doing now with my wife, like, we're building like something that will last far, far off into the future. It's something, we're creating a family and children, and we're building things in our community, and we're working on relationships with other people. There's a stability and a strength there, which I just never had when I was the single guy running around, attracted to all kinds of new things in the big city, doing whatever was coming up. It's like, now my time is under far more pressure, so I'm much more well considered when I get asked to do something, that I really consider it carefully. And I think, like, how does this fit into everything else that I'm doing? and then and then I'm, you know, and I'm not just doing it for my own sake, but I have also both my wife and my 3 sons to take into account. Like, is this something that's worthy of my time and energy, and could I be instead investing it in them and doing something with them as well? And so it's not just me and my needs and my selfish things, you know, because actually they've become far more important for me than what I am.
Yeah.
And so it means that I become a man who can actually build something meaningful in the long term in a far deeper way than I ever could by myself. And so I believe that this is what all men actually do desire.
Mhm.
You know, we want to transcend time, the, you know, the limitations of time and our own kind of finite existence. And this is how we do it. Actually, we do something meaningful in a much more long-term perspective.
Yeah, I love that, man. And I think you touched on something very key there. Like even growing up, there was a point at which growing up in Turkey, you know, you marry someone and that's your relationship for life. And that was the belief that I had at some point. And then coming to the US, it was very strange seeing people at the beginning having such casual views of relationships. In fact, I remember um, I had this female friend who was like dating this guy, and me and her were just having some breakfast. And I was like, "Oh, how are things going with this guy you're dating?" And she's like, "We're not dating, we're just seeing each other." And I was like, "What does that mean? What's the difference? You're going on dates, right?" And that was the first time in my life where I heard that terminology. It was very confusing.
Mhm.
And I think what you've mentioned is very beautiful in the sense that guys do want to build something meaningful
Mhm.
long term. And that's where having a partner is extremely important. Like a lot of the focus I have with guys that I work with, they're not guys who want to sleep around. They're guys who want something genuine, which is why most of my clients are like late 20s, early 30s, maybe dated around a bit and want something meaningful. So I'm 100% with you on that. Now, what I'll add there is I do think the ability to socialize and be as authentic as we can be in situations with women or just with people is also a meaningful journey to go on, so that within that relationship we have high levels of communication. Because I think there's a danger in which if someone doesn't build that skill and then they pursue a relationship for the sake of the relationship, then the relationship may not satisfy their needs of intimacy because they haven't learned how to communicate. But also, when you do have kids, it's like, how do you actually lead them? Which is not something I can talk about, but I can only imagine how challenging it must have been for you at times to lead just tiny humans running around.
Yeah, who don't want to be led in any way whatsoever. Okay, great. And then I have one more area I want to go into, Ege, and I
Yeah.
think we'll finish it off there, because I think you're right. Like, communication is important, and a lot of people have some anxiety and all kinds of different things that make that difficult for them. I think that there's actually a choice there. So again, I have a different model or approach that I think one could go in.
Okay.
What I see you're doing is you're kind of like going up a layer to like the social interactive skill learning level, and trying to teach people that. I would go the opposite direction. I'd actually say, let's go deeper and look at the more foundational aspects of your being and see if we can find out what's not aligned there. And
Mm.
so in your conversation with Shauna, I heard you saying, like, you know, there's a lot of guys who think they're all just mind, but they also have a body. And so they need to be in touch with their body. And I really agree with that. And it's been a very big part of my journey, because for the first 25 years of my life, I was just up in my head all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, since up until I was about maybe 35 or something like that, I hadn't discovered. And then I discovered, like, man also has a soul. And I
Yeah.
believe that there's a spiritual dimension to life, which is actually underlying all of these things. And when I get clarity on the spiritual dimension of life and understand, like, why am I here? What am I doing? What is all of this? What are human beings?
Yeah.
Those kinds of questions, right? That's when talking to a woman becomes very easy, because I actually understand, like, what all of this is about. And so
Mm.
I'm curious about your reaction to, where are you on, like, do we have souls? Is there also a spiritual aspect to human beings? And how
Oh
does
yeah.
one understand that better?
Yeah. There's definitely a spiritual aspect to being for sure. And I think It's like you can come to that, as you said, when you realize that, hey, this is why I'm here, this is what's happening. That's why, like, actually, a lot of people who promote the Christian religion, they can come to you with so much conviction, right? Because they're coming to you with something they deeply believe in. I don't know if you guys have that in Europe, but in the US, like outside of churches, there'll be people who come up and speak to you about Jesus in the Bible.
Yeah.
And they're really good speakers because they truly believe. And I
Yeah.
can imagine when you have that level of knowing, that wisdom would lead to, like, why would I be scared to go talk to a woman? And I
Mhm.
think on the other hand, there are different ways to approach the same thing and come back to that same realization. And I think the way the social arena is valuable is like we also create the social world. It's like how we see reality is also projection because it's constantly filtered by our beliefs.
Mhm.
But then if we can experience something in reality that shifts our beliefs, then that shifts our belief in what we think we deserve and what we think we can get.
Mhm.
So the way I see it is like reality and people are just mirrors of what we believe in. And we're always projecting out our beliefs. So for someone who does go into the social realm with this spiritual understanding, like this is about my own journey, and I'm going to be in my heart, I'm going to be as true to who I believe I am as much as I can. And that doesn't mean you have to sleep around, you have to go on a lot of dates, but it does mean stepping into that courage. I think when someone does that for enough period or for a period long enough, what happens is they realize reality is actually a lot friendlier than I think. Because someone with anxiety or someone stuck in their mind with a lot of doubts thinks if I engage in reality, I'm in danger. So
Mhm.
then you can recognize that by being social and seeing, wow, this woman is interested in me. Wow, this guy wants to keep in touch. Wow, this person wants to be my friend. Wow, I'm actually building a connection with this woman who I didn't think I deserved. Then that realization shifts it back into, hey, this is why I'm here. Reality is very good to me. Why shouldn't I be grateful to be here? And then project that onto other people. So I think in that sense, it's different ways of coming at a similar thing.
Yeah. No, I think I can definitely agree. I think both are, you need to have both, and
Mhm.
different people will need different amounts of either. And so absolutely there's a risk if I'm just like going off and meditating in a cave every day for years on end, I might just end up very disconnected from reality. Whereas if I'm balancing a spiritual deepening with a embodied community, a physical in-person
Mhm.
community, and at the same time, preferably with members of that community who are sharing an attempt to become better people and healing their wounds through a deepening spiritual practice. That's how we can actually, for me, that's the best place actually to find a partner. It is in a spiritual community.
Mhm.
I'm not at all, I'm an Orthodox Christian, not much you know about it, but Orthodox Christianity doesn't believe in going out into the streets and evangelizing people. I think that's a bit of it's a misguided, as you said, like it's about this projection onto other people. Like, oh, I've heard this massive, beautiful, amazing news. I need to go tell everybody else about it. And, the focus is often removed from,
Mhm.
applying it to one's own life. So that's what scared me away from Christianity in my childhood and why I spent most of my adult life as an atheist, refusing to go anywhere close to it. Um, but I do think that the community is important. Social interaction is important. We're very social human beings. What I am comes into being an interaction with other human beings, and there's something transcendent about meeting other humans. And
Mhm.
then the thing that I would add is that I've just found for a lot of guys, if they're struggling with their relationships with women, the first thing they
Mhm.
should do is to first of all focus on their relationships with other guys, and
Yeah.
especially like deep and meaningful relationships with or conversations with other guys where they're mutually looking to support and build each other up, because that's
Mhm.
something that can help you. I think you were spot on when you said, like, a lot of people have this idea that like existence is dangerous or the world is dangerous, and so getting
Mhm.
over that existential anxiety through in-person relationships and also through our beliefs. Beliefs are a very long way of decision. Our beliefs decide how we see reality, exactly like you said it. So it's like, I totally get it why, for a long time I thought, like, Christianity has some really crazy beliefs, but when you
Mhm.
step into those beliefs, then suddenly you see a reality through them, then everything falls into place. So it is the beliefs that we assume that then determine what we see.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's this decision, right, of exercising. It's the only thing that we can't do is say like, oh no, I don't believe in anything. You know, we have to put our faith in something. You know, you can put your faith in science, or you can put your faith in, you know, whatever else it is, in the government or something like that. But at the end of the day, we have to put our faith into something.
Yeah. I love that you brought putting faith into something, because I think a lot of this journey as well, just in life in general, is having that trust, right? It's like the less trust we have on, you know, either religion or on the universe, as I'll call it, the more we try to control things, and then the need to control creates a lot of suffering. And I think that's where guys who maybe are not getting the attention they want from women, and their whole goal is, hey, I want to sleep with as many women as I can.
Or just I need to find a partner and I can't make it happen. Like that can also be a need to control, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like, if you come at that with a lot of craving, you only create suffering for yourself. And that's where I think stepping into the heart, you can still work towards something meaningful, but doing it with less tension in the mind and doing it more from the heart is, I think, a much smoother way, a path to follow.
I think that's a really good point, and yeah, a good place to finish off, Ege. So anything you want to finish off by saying or adding in here from the conversation, or another topic you want to bring in before we close things off?
Yeah, the main thing I'd like to say is thank you for having me on. I can see you know, the back and forth we had on email and some of the questions you asked, just like we talked about, right? We come from different realities and some perspectives, but I think having conversations like this is so key for that reason, because the more we ask questions to each other, and especially people we may not fully on surface agree with, the more we understand where they're coming from and where we're coming from. So I appreciate the fact that we're having this conversation, and hopefully people who are listening learn something, and I got a lot out of it myself.
Absolutely, as did I. And yeah, it's what the whole of the organization that we run, Manifesto and Core, is really built on, is having a strong group of guys around you who are willing to express their disagreements and to talk about the things that they're concerned about, and to be able to figure out like, well, what is it that we're actually aiming for, and how can we be helping each other, or, and you know, calling out the things that don't make sense, but listening as well to try and see like how can we be building each other up. I think that's the core thing. So yeah, if someone listening is interested in that, then we have this organization, Manifesto Core. I'll put the link in the description of the video here. And you also have a website where you're offering your services for men, especially logically minded men, who sometimes I think I recognize my own background there as well, have a hard time connecting with women, right? Do you want to just talk a little bit about that before we close off?
Yeah, for sure. My website is irresistible.gentleman.com. You can also message me on Facebook, Ege Reynolds. And yeah, we do help analytical minded men, because before getting into this, I was an engineer myself. I studied computer science. I was quite much in the mind. And what I realized is, funny enough, like when people have the transition from the mind to the heart, the logically minded guys are usually the ones with the biggest hearts as well, because they're so introspective and they've taken the time to understand reality. So when they step into the heart, they have that capacity to expand that energy. So if you'd like help on that, or if you just enjoy this episode and want to give me some feedback and what resonated with you, I'm always happy to help people.
Great. Thank you so much, Ege. Great conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.